My name is Chris, though you might recognize my voice from another channel called Stoehovve, where I do various tutorial videos for Fantasy Grounds Unity. In this collaboration with Smiteworks, I will be walking you through the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Fizban's Treasury of Dragons supplement module from a player's point of view. The Fizban's Treasury of Dragons supplement was released in October of 2021, and is a new supplement guide that expands on all things related to dragons. In relation to a player, these are going to include things like the following. There are additional racial options for Dragonborn-based characters. There are new class specializations for the Monk and Ranger classes, and there is now a means to link non-sorcerer-based characters to Draconic origin concepts in some way, shape, or form. There are also a couple of new feats you can select during character creation when building a custom lineage, or as your character levels and has gained the means to adjust ability scores through that process. There are also gifts that you will receive from dragons that will function very much like a feat as well. You also have several new spells and magic items that you can make use of as a player. As this supplement contains details for players and dungeon masters, I am going to record 2 separate videos to reduce the risk of spoiling critical details for those players who would like to avoid them. This particular video is going to be oriented towards the player, and I'm going to cover all of the new options that are now available to you that you can make use of in relation to your characters. For those who own the PDF or physical copies alongside the Fantasy Grounds module, this is going to equate to Chapters 1 and a good portion of Chapter 2. As a player, you will not need to purchase this module, as it will be downloaded by Fantasy Grounds Unity at the time your system connects to the Dungeon Master's campaign session. If you are only a player and never really go through the process of actually DMing any campaigns, I highly recommend that you refrain from adding this module to your collection. And that's only because there's quite a bit of information that is primarily oriented towards the Dungeon Master, and it has the potential to spoil some of the surprise in relation to running into a dragon. This is a bit of a double-edged sword, however, as I feel I'm not doing Smiteworks or Wizards of the Coast any justice by making that recommendation. And the last thing I want to do is encourage someone from not supporting both of these companies for the games and hours of fun that they have provided to us. But at the same time, I also don't want to put a player in a position where they might have spoiled that anticipation, stress, and fear of running into a dragon. However, if you still want to purchase this module, I will include the links to the various bundles where you can find this module in relation to Fantasy Grounds Unity. When you connect to the Dungeon Master session, their system is going to transfer a temporary copy of the module over to your client. Once that process is completed, which is usually done immediately after you've authenticated to the campaign server, you will have a couple of options generally that you can make use of in order to actually load this module. It doesn't work for this particular module, but normally what you would do is you would go into the campaign setup window here, click on the next page, and access this data modules panel. Down here is a 5e all core rules option, which you would click, and under normal circumstances, it would go through and it would include all of the player-related modules that the Dungeon Master is allowing in relation to what can and cannot be loaded. And as you can see here, there's quite a few. The one thing that you might notice here, though, is that Fizban's doesn't show up in this list. Now, I'm unsure if that is an oversight in relation to Smiteworks, or if it's intentionally done that way. So I've shown this just on the off chance that that changes in the future. But the second way that you can go through and do this is a little bit different. The second way is going through and making use of the modules panel directly. So when you click on this modules panel over here, that's buried underneath the library category, you can click on this activation button that is at the bottom left at the current time of this recording on that modules panel. This is going to load up a module activation listing, and all you have to do is search for Fizban. After that, you just simply click load and you are good to go. As I've already mentioned, Fizban's Treasury of Dragons has a mixture of player and non-player content broken into segmented modules. This means that as a player, you would only be able to make use of the player's module, which is what we just loaded. And within that module are all of the items that you would need to create a new character, such as in utilizing the new variations of the Dragonborn races, in addition to a couple of new subclasses, a few new feats, some spells, and even a new feature called the Draconic Mark, the contents of which you're going to find under the following panels. The first is right under the Modules panel, and that is how you can immediately access the reference manual that is structured towards the player. And this is only going to cover a good portion of Chapter 1 and a small portion of Chapter 2 in relation to the full printed version of the module. The other ones are going to be found under the character and campaign sections within this window, the first of which is going to be within the Classes panel, where you're going to find the 2 new subclasses for the Monk and the Ranger class. You will also find information under the Feats panel, which is going to include a combination of the new feats, which are these 3 here that you can make use of, as well as a couple of other features here that are going to be classified as Draconic Marks, i.e. they're the gifts that you can receive from a dragon. Within the Races panel, you're going to find the 3 groupings, if you will, of the Dragonborn races. So there's now the Chromatic, Gem, and Metallic-based Dragonborn. In the player's handbook, only the Metallic and the Chromatic Dragonborn exist in relation to a single racial entry, and that's broken out into 10, I believe, different subraces. Fizban has reorganized that a little bit in that it's now created 3 quote-unquote top category races, each of which have 5 subraces that represent the different elemental kinds of damage and resistances that your character is going to be able to use. The Spells panel also contains all of the new spells that are available to a number of the different classes that exist within Fantasy Grounds and Dungeons & Dragons. And that will complete all of the ones that you will find here under the character category. The next ones that you will find are going to be under the Images and the Tables panels here in relation to images that would be specific to the reference manual, as well as being linked directly from some of the races and class sheets. And finally, the tables here that are used to randomly generate a few things that are specific to some origins, or even related to a, let's call it a surge magic of some kind. The Classes panel provides you 2 new class specializations that you can use for your characters. One that is for the Monk class, and one that is for the Ranger class. And you will find them down at the bottom of each of these particular class sheets. Specifically, it's the Way of the Ascendant Dragon and the Drake Warden. The Way of the Ascendant Dragon monastic tradition provides a draconic variation for the Monk class that looks quite interesting to play. It links the monastic tradition to a draconic god called Bahamut, which I'm hoping I'm pronouncing right, who is said to have traveled the material plane as a monk during times of great need. It was he who founded the first monastery of the Way of the Dragon so others could learn to attune themselves more closely to the world and any magic around them. The Drake Warden class specialization, on the other hand, expands that connection with nature that Rangers already have with them to the world around them. Through this class specialization, it is said that a Ranger understands the world around them so well that they are able to manifest a magical Drake companion that grows alongside that Ranger's own experiences. Now, I will not be covering how you can go ahead and create either of these characters using either of these particular class specializations in this particular video, because I've already covered those on my own channel, and I go into great detail around these class specializations in those videos. I will be sure to link those in the description below so that you can quickly access them for your own interest. And if you're interested in either of these classes, I highly recommend that you review those videos to help you set up your character within Fantasy Grounds Unity, as it will help you alleviate some of the burden of having to figure out how to do that on your own. The Feats panel introduces new feats that are actually made up of feats and draconic gifts, though, for the purposes of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, they act as feats. Of those feats, the Gift of the Chromatic Dragon, the Gift of the Gem Dragon, and the Gift of the Metallic Dragon are feats that you can take while you're going through and creating a character utilizing the custom lineage, or at the time that you've gained an ability score improvement as your character levels up. The remaining items that are listed, on the other hand, would be generally gifted by the Dungeon Master, as they are really meant to be gained when your character is present at the time that a dragon has died. And the way that you can tell that one of these features is like that is if you click on the actual feat itself, you will see Draconic Gift, and they will have a different range of rarities associated with them. These are the feats that you can gain through the death of a dragon, whether that's through natural causes or whether you were involved in their death directly. And what it is that this mark is essentially a manifestation of a portion of that dragon's magic that is being transferred into your character. And Dungeons & Dragons links this to your character as a feat, hence why only these few feats can be selected by you at the time that you have the ability to do so, while the rest are granted through the Dungeon Master at the time a particular dragon dies. At the time that the Player's Handbook was published, it introduced a single Dragonborn race that had multiple sub-races to cover the creation, or the representation, if you will, of the metallic and the chromatic dragons. With Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, this is now broken out into 3 distinct racial classes that are then have their own grouping of sub-races within them. So if we take a look at the chromatic dragon, for example, and then scroll down to the sub-race, you will see that we have the black, blue, green, red, and white dragons listed here. This supplement does go into almost everything in relation to a given draconic origin, and that is including things like the Dragonborn races. So it makes sense that all of that information is going to be more formally structured in this kind of supplement. It also is a nice, clever way to introduce that there is in fact a third variation of dragon, specifically the gem dragon, because up until now we really haven't seen those. If you take a comparison of these 3 information sheets, you will see that there are some subtle differences. Specifically, there are some new traits that are added as the dragons, quote unquote, get closer to current time. And that is because the chromatic dragon was the very first, quote unquote, set of dragonborn races that was introduced, and it was a variation of the original chromatic dragons that were introduced when Dungeons & Dragons first came out. Shortly after that, metallic dragons made an appearance. And those are your platinums, your gold, your silver, your copper, and your brass dragons that you can see in some literature and storylines and campaigns that have been released since. There's been a change here in the sense that there's now a metallic breath weapon, and that's because this deals and functions a little bit differently than the typical breath weapon of a chromatic dragon. Now, I keep saying dragon, and I'm referring to both dragons and dragonborn associated with that. Gemstone dragons, however, are new, and I believe they're new when it comes to the Fizban supplement. They gain psionic mind and gem flight capabilities, but they also do have the ability to breathe a breath weapon of some kind. And once again, they function completely different than how the other 2 do. This is why it made sense to break these particular groupings of dragonborn races into their chromatic, metallic, and gem origins. Because there is now enough of a difference, according to Fizban, who has completed the research to be able to identify those differences, that they should be grouped under different classifications. However, no matter which type of Dragonborn you have selected, each has its own grouping of 5 subraces that define the damage type, the resistances, and in some cases the immunities that can be gained by your character that all come through from the ancestral dragon or the progenitor dragon that spawned that particular race of subdragon or dragonborn. There is also the introduction of new spells, and once again, these all have some form of draconic theme about them. There are a total of 7 new spells that contain a mixture of offensive, defensive, movement, and summoning magic, as well as one that has the potential to trigger something akin to wild magic, although only in a limited sense. The new spells give the Artificer, Bard, Druid, Ranger, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard classes some additional choices when it comes to what spells they can incorporate into their known spells listings. However, not all classes gain access to all of these spells. So for example, if you take a look at the Summoning Draconic Spirit here, for example, you have Druid, Sorcerer, and Wizard classes that can make use of this particular spell. Whereas if you look at Nathair's Mischief, you can see that Bard, Sorcerer, and Wizard are the groupings here. In fact, I think, no, the last one was Druid, wasn't it? Yep, Druid. So the Bard and the Druid have changed here in this particular case. But the good news here for you as a player, you can now have a brand new selection of spells that you can incorporate into your known spells listing. However, as a Dungeon Master, I am probably going to make these something that you would be able to find as part of the rewards related to a particular campaign associated with dragons in some way, shape, or form, whether you're going through their lair or whether you're having a conversation with a dragon and they teach that particular spell to you through that particular process. And that's primarily because unless you're utilizing a dragonborn race or some form of class that is directly associated with dragons in some way, shape, or form, you may not necessarily be aware of these spells at the time that you're going through and creating your character. When it comes to the images panel, these images are all linked through the reference manual that you will find out of the modules panel. And that's because they're here to help with the formatting and structure of the reference manual itself. But if you want to look at them individually, the best place to go and find them is through the images panel, because you can just simply click on them and load them up, although it's interesting that that's there. Having said that, though, you can see here that there's Fizbans, we've got a monk here, we have a dragonborn sellsword, and various cover art that you will find that was originally published when the module itself was published. And these are all images that you would normally find within the printed version of the module, or even in the hardcover, if you happen to do what I do and like to buy hardcovers as well as copies of the Fantasy Grounds modules. Some of these are inspirationally artistic to help set the atmosphere of being Dragonborn, or related to the Drake Warden or the Way of the Ascendant Dragon class specializations, to provide you some visual trigger to spark something and give you some form of idea to be able to customize your character that links it to the draconic concept. But in relation to Fantasy Grounds, they are simply there to ensure that the formatting of the reference manual is correct and structured in a way that makes it visually appealing and easy to read. And the last panel that I want to go over is the tables panel. And this is where you're going to find additional customization tables that you can use to find the origin of your character's love or dislike of dragons, your class origins, marks linked to a dragon, and even the surge table associated and used by Nether's Mischief spell. Each of these tables are linked to from the appropriate reference. For example, the Ascendant Dragon origin page here, or table I should say, is directly linked from the information sheet around the class specialization. Same with the Drake Warden origin here. Whereas the Draconic Character Ties information sheet or table here is linked to directly from the reference manual. All of these tables are utilitarian in nature, but the Draconic Marks and Mischievous Surge tables will come into place when gaining the Mark of a Dragon, or when attempting to cast Nether's Mischief spell to define the surge that actually goes through and happens at the time that you cast it, of which there are a total of 4. As a result, you will be able to quickly access these tables when and where you need them, so don't worry about that. As you can see, Fizban's Treasury of Dragons adds quite a bit of new content to the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rule set, as well as more finely defines the various Dragonborn race elements. These are all going to be quite useful for any player who is interested in creating a character of some kind that relates to the dragon or Dragonborn races in some way, shape, or form. And I really look forward to seeing how a lot of those characters are going to play out in my campaigns. I want to thank you for watching this video on behalf of Smiteworks and myself. I also want to thank Smiteworks for providing me the opportunity to present this information on their channel, and I look forward to continuing with our collaboration. Please click on the like button if you found the information in this video useful to helping you learn how to use Fantasy Grounds Unity in relation to Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. And consider subscribing to the Smiteworks Fantasy Grounds YouTube channel to keep up to date with new content as it is released. If you have questions or comments about this particular video, feel free to post them in the comment section of the video below for others to see and contribute to the discussion.